Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Příhodová. I'm the curator of PQ Talks, and I want to welcome you here in our beautiful space. It's wonderful to see again a full house. We are continuing with our discussions, and the topic for now is light and performance. We have a wonderful panel roundup, Thinking Light, International Perspectives on Light and Performance. So I want to welcome our panelists, and I'm giving the mic over to Scott Palmer. Welcome.
Hi everybody, welcome. It's how fantastic to see so many people here interested in light. I'm Scott, I'm an associate professor in performance design at the University of Leeds in the UK. And we've brought here together today an international panel of speakers to explore light as a theatrical material that has strangely often been overlooked and neglected in theatrical discourse. In allowing us to foreground light in this arena at PQ, I'd like to formally thank Barbara Příhodová and her team for helping us to curate this panel and for all of the unseen labour that's been undertaken to put this whole programme together. Thank you. Our speakers come from across the globe, very deliberately, but I'm very sorry to tell you that our last speaker, Nkululeko Sibanda, who is a Zimbabwean lighting designer, has not been allowed to travel to Czechia, so he was refused a visa. So unfortunately, although we said we'd try and accommodate him, he's not going to be speaking here today. So the session is going to be 4 speakers following my introduction. And we hope that it still will provide and stimulate conversation in the session that follows. And after about 50 minutes or so, we're going to give you a reflection time, and then we're going to throw the session open for questions from the floor, hopefully to pick up some of the things that we might be discussing. The presenters are in alphabetical order, so I just wanted to make it clear that with Nkululeko not being here, it's not the men first and then the women. That was not a deliberate design. So, thinking light. Here are some of the areas that we're aiming to address in this session. We are looking at international variations in approaches to lighting design. We're asking, what does light do in and for performance? We are looking at light as a material presence, both in the theatre and on the expanded stage beyond the theatre building. And we're really interested in the experience of light on audiences, and light and the experience of space and time. We cannot really begin to think about light without acknowledging and considering darkness and shadow, something that out of Appia was first observed in the 1890s and will be picked up in some of the presentations today. In reflecting on contemporary performance in his book Looking into the Abyss, Essays on Sonography, Arnold Aronson reminds us that, quote, what we don't see becomes as important as what we do see. But light is not just about seeing, it's also about what you feel. And here you can see an example of a contemporary performance on in London at the moment, Punch Drunk's The Burnt City, a relational performance where the audience and performers share the same space. There's no separation between auditorium and stage, and where the felt qualities of light and darkness become an integral element to the whole audience experience. So it's shaped by light and, as you see in this image, by darkness. This session it emerges from a very recent publication, Contemporary Performance Lighting. It's the 10th volume in a series that I co-edit with Jocelyn McKinney and Stephen Di Benedetto. And this volume is co-edited with Catherine, who's here on the panel, and Kelly Zazulka, who teaches at Salford in the United Kingdom. It's a book about light. It's about a book about the work of designers and what light does in and for performance. And it's organized in terms of three critical frameworks: experience, creativity, and meaning. And we believe it's the first critical anthology dedicated to theatrical light in the English language. Importantly, I think, it's also written from a position of practical understanding of what light is. It brings together theory and practice and provides a space for new voices, practitioners and academics and lighting designers to analyse and reflect on the potentiality of light in contemporary performance. Light is a strange material. Paradoxically, it's immaterial. Its materiality is only obtained by proxy and by coming into contact with an object in space. So light's materiality is inherently bound to the spatial and temporal conditions in which it is employed. And light, of course, is ever-changing. It is the ultimate transformational material. It transcends the cognitive and moves into the non-representational, into the realm of the affective and the sensual. And that's Tim Edensaw. Light has a deep and profound psychological and physiological effect on the human body. And these deep biological and neurological levels of sonographic processes are key to our understanding of the visible, spatial, and temporal world. So, the subliminal experience of light and its transitions, lighting cues, play a critical role in our reception of performance from the very moment as an audience that we cross the threshold and enter the space in which the performance is held. And this is frequently a space that is demarked and delineated through light. I'm just going to show you a few images taken from the book, which give you an impression of the range of discourse about theatrical light that's covered there. For example, this is a piece created by a number of lighting designers across the UK during the pandemic. This is the Lytton Trees. And this is when we were in lockdown and not allowed to move from our homes. And this was a lighting performance across the breadth of the United Kingdom, which could be shared locally with people who were close by, but was also experienced as digitally online. Some well-known productions feature. Pauline Constable is one of the authors in the volume, and she focuses on light as dramaturgy and light as a storytelling device. This is, so there are some important new voices in the volume. Catherine Williams, who's the lighting designer for a company called Rashdash in the UK, and she uses a feminist perspective on light, creating a living, breathing entity that dances with the women on stage in this production. And this is Jesper Konskjal's work. He's a lighting designer, architect, and the lighting designer for Tivoli Gardens in Copenhagen. It's an amusement park right in the city of Copenhagen. And this is some really important research on how light directly conditions visitor behavior in the park. And in his writing, he explores the phenomenon of people coming into the park to immerse themselves in light, both the artificial light in the park, but also, in particular, visitors arriving at the moment of twilight and sitting in the park, enjoying the experience of the natural light disappearing, which happens over a long period of time in the Northern Hemisphere, and enjoying the effect of the more theatrical lights of the park taking over and spending time in the darkness. So we are interested in the immersion in light and how lighting design has broken out of the traditional stage space and into auditoria and beyond. And here, Lucy Carter, another writer in the book, her work with Wayne McGregor. And to finish, and to link to our next speaker, I'd like to go back over a century to and acknowledge the thinking of light pioneer Adolphe Appia, who first advocated for the power of theatrical light and how it should be considered as a material force shaped over time, and like music, light, just like the actor, he said, must become active. Light has an almost miraculous flexibility. It can create shadows, make them living, and spread the harmony of their vibrations in space, just as music does. So these are not new ideas, but I'm hoping the panel are going to pick up on some of those aspects. And so next, I'd like to introduce you to Danish designer Michael Breiner. He works in contemporary performance, dance and opera, based in Copenhagen. I use one of his image of one of his designs on my opening slide. Michael researches relationships between darkness, time and space, and employs these elements explicitly in his artistic practice. Please welcome Michael Breiner.
Thank you so much, Scott, and thank you for inviting me here for the PQ talk on light. Hello, everybody. So I'm going to talk on darkness instead of light today, because it's been something I've been struggling with for some years, and I would like to give you kind of an insight into my design perspective of how I work with darkness from that viewpoint. So let's see if this works. Yes. So this is the Danish National School of Performing Arts, where I used to work many years. And the reason why I show you this is because while I was working, or I am working as a freelance lighting designer, I was also teaching at the same time. And this dialogue between the professional work and the teaching informed my way of viewing my work together with students. So it actually developed a new language for me. And the Danish National School of Performance Arts transitioned into a BA and an MA system during the last 15 years. And we as teachers were asked to do artistic research. And in doing that, I had to pick a topic. And as a lighting designer, when you're asked to research about light, it can be a little bit daunting. Because the first things that pops up into your mind could be people like Albert Einstein and stuff like this. So I thought, okay, maybe I just research darkness, because that's much more easy and nobody's really done it. So that's what I did. So that's it. So, I actually worked with total darkness and immersing people in total darkness and doing a lot of research with that. Very interesting stuff. I'll tell you about it another day. But something happened in that process. And that process was that I began to work in a different way as a lighting designer. So this is an interesting image. You might know it. This is from Nosferatu by Murnau. It's from 1922, I think. Die Symphonie des Graues, I think it's called. A surrealistic silent movie about a vampire. And I remember seeing this as a child and being really scared, but also really, really interested in this way they were using shadows and darkness, and also changing the size of the vampire. It became small and big, stuff like this. Very fascinating. Then I forgot about it for many years. And somehow it stuck with me, the interest of darkness, the interest of things that are hidden, things that are mysterious and all this stuff. So I started looking at light, as I told you, in a new way. And what I would like to now introduce is kind of a methodology I think I'm trying to make, And I'm very much actually inspired by Appier's thinking about active and passive light. And so I have been devising maybe my own method or thinking about it that I call active and passive darkness. And trying to explain this very fast, here we see an object, and this object is lit, obviously, and casting shadows. And when we perceive an object, we navigate the object with light. It's an information space, I would call it. And light and shadow are providing us information about the object's texture and structure. And also, it's obvious here to see that the surface of this object is kind of protruding on us. And if we change it, this object is different. And here the light is telling us a different story. And it can be a little bit hard to discern where the light is actually coming from in this image. But it is obvious that this is recessing, kind of drawing itself away from us. And if we see the two objects together, it's very obvious. But this is a mind trick, because it is the same image. I just flipped it. So our brain is playing tricks on us all the time, and we are in this information space. And I think this is very important as lighting designers to understand that we are manipulating information. I'm too fast. Yes. So that's what I would call an what do we call it? An example of active darkness. So this is from a performance I did in 2007 together with Lise, who's actually here, who's the set designer. And this is Anders. Maybe you can see Anders in the back here. And maybe this picture looks like something I showed you earlier, because I just realized that Murnau is still with me somehow, Nosferatu. In this production, this is called Paper, Scissors and Rocks. And the performer works with paper, scissors and rocks and, and makes different rituals. And at this moment in the performance, the paper is cut from behind, but you don't realize that he's using the scissor before we project it with light. So light is giving us an additional information here, but also changing the space at the same time. And for me, this is an active use of darkness, where we kind of activate or animate the darkness. So that's the active darkness. So another example of passive, a way to use passive darkness. This is from an opera I did last year. This is Siegfried. Some of you might know it. It's in the Wagner cycle. And just to give you a little bit of information to understand the image, this is a very classical piece. And this is Siegfried. And Siegfried is about to kill the dragon, Fafner. In our performance, the dragon was not a dragon, but more like a angel of death, maybe, because it's a symbol of fear, and Siegfried is looking for fear. He wants to find out what fear feels like, because he has no fear. He's a fearless hero. So he goes to Fafner, and here we are working actively with what I would call passive darkness. So this figure, this angel of death, comes out slowly out of the darkness, and the darkness is hiding information from us. It's a hidden information space. So the darkness is not manipulated, but the performers are kind of manipulating it by traversing it. And when Siegfried then meets the dragon, or the, what you call this, the demon, or angel of death, during the battle, they have a battle, the light starts to flash in small kind of flashes. So you only see these wings in very small flashes, and actually this singer flies and all kinds of stuff. And the battle ends with Siegfried cutting off the wings, and Fafner shows up to be actually not a demon, but a giant that was once transformed into this demon. And then he dies after his singing along area. So this was examples of ways of using darkness actively and passively in order to shape spaces, time, but also in order to control information. And I think this is the main interesting part about light, that it is an information medium that we are constantly accessing to see colors, shape, time, space, feelings maybe, and maybe, yeah, imagination. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I should also said Michael has a chapter in the book where he's writing about his use of or inspiration with natural light in productions of Wagner. So yeah, I missed that out of the introduction. So next, I'm delighted to introduce Amy Chan. Amy is a light artist working at the intersection of performance, installation, music, and science. She is the co-founder of a drama collaboratory, an interdisciplinary research practice performance laboratory based in Hong Kong. Light is the protagonist, antagonist, and co-performer of her works. Please welcome Amy Chan.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me and including me in this PQ talk to share with you my work. So a little bit more about myself. So actually, I'm in my works, in the following works that I'm going to show you or share with you. In fact, they are mostly solo works and also mostly light installation performance. And as you can see from this title page, that I'm also the performer. Many of the time, I'm also the performer working with the lights and the light installation myself. So, and through this creative process that helps me to bring out some different perspective or some different creative concepts or the potentiality about light in my works. So it shows, now it's showing a very entangled network of potentiality or artistic possibility of light, and in which I'm going to share with you through 3 of my original solo works. So first of all is morbid anatomy. So just to a little bit further contextualize myself, other than as a light artist, I also have a scientific and medical training background and still practicing medicine. So a lot of my works is actually informed or inspired by my own medical practice. So this is morbid anatomy. It's actually an old name for pathology. So it's a critical examination, reflections on the interrelationship between medicine and human being. And throughout this creative and also rehearsal process, actually I actively as a performer work with the light, both the immaterial light and also the material presence, the material form of domestic light equipment. Say for example, this is a table lamp. Initially you can see me actually playing with the table lamp like playing a puppet. But later on, gradually, you can see that I'm now submitting to the power of the light myself. And through this, it's actually suggesting that light can be an oppressor, or the oppressed, or even a co-performer in this scene. And also, it also dissect and deconstruct the performer, light artist, pathologist, which is myself. So another perspective is further to this, actually, it could be a criticism to the topics or the performer or the performance. So in which another scene is actually informed. Medicine is not just a topic to be interrogated, but it's actually as another discipline to inform or to inspire the works itself. So that makes the work to escape from the representational or very grand narratives of medicine. And in this scene, actually, is inspired by the preservation of specimen. So this light is actually being put into this specimen jar, but at the same time, the red light evades from the restraints of the jar. And in this, it forms a criticism, and also it reflects on my own body. It forms a criticism to the medicine and also to the potentiality or the forms of the light itself. And in many of the, so you can see that it's actually a space in the pathology teaching laboratory. So you can see that all spectators are actually in a very close proximity to the all this light and space. And in this, through this light spillover and also the shared light space, it also actively conversing with the spectators. And this is also one of the work that I try to explore this concept about the musicality of light, because I would like to, in which, as you can see, that I would like to find a language or a narrative or framework for light itself. So it's through the musicality or through the music or music composition as a concept or as a model. So in this case, so say for example, in the table lamp, I use the switch, the on-off, the literal sound, and also the rhythmic composition of the lights. Or even in this scene, I use the laser scanner and also the sound of the laser scanner and all other subjects. They form, informed by the minimalistic musical composition to form like a music of the light with all these things and the space on its own. And so this is the start of my exploration that to explore this musicality of light through sound, literal sound, and also music composition as a framework. And later on, it's developed into another work, which is a light installation. It's called, it's actually a light installation, but it's more like, to me, it's more like a duration performance, but without the performer. So it's actually called Memento Mori Sonata for Light. It's a work in a contemporary photography gallery. So that makes me to think or to wonder or to really revisit what's the relationship between light and photography. And when I going through when I research it, so of course it's this contemplation of light, time, depth, photography, and music. So one of the very influential work by Hollenbach must be, it's definitely one of the reference. So Camera Lucida. Camera Lucida, we always quote Hollenbach about the punctum of the photography. But at the same time, he has a very interesting saying that he says that the photographs he likes were constructed in the manner of a classical sonata. So that makes me to think about, how about making a sonata, the music form, as a key structure of the light composition. So you can see that it's actually, from a sonata form, the basic is about two contrasting themes. So the tungsten, the warm tungsten, and also the cool white LED. So through this musical composition, also the camera shutter sound is also included literally as part of this music composition. So through all this, as the space, the lights, the contrasting lights, and also the sound, I construct literally almost like a sonata with exposition, development, recapitulations, and also the coda. So, and nonetheless, and through this, I would like to explore further how this musical composition of light or musicality of light could be pushed further. So I really think about actually writing a score for this light. And through writing the light, I find that actually I'm escaping from the usual concept about the light, that we think about the scene and then later on think about the transition. I literally take all this horizontal temporal conception of light into composition that also helps me to find and to really find another expression or the aesthetics for light of myself. But even though it sounds like a very highly structural light installation, light composition, but in fact there's no definite viewing point for this space. So spectators are free to wander around, and at the same time, if you notice, there's actually some literal granite chips on the floor. So that means that once the spectators are moving around, their shadows and their sounds, the steps on the floor become part of this highly structural music composition and turn it into a polyphonic composition, which includes the spectatorship or the spectators through their movement, non-movement, shadows, and sound. And So lastly, the last work that I would like to share is Things That Talk, which is also a light installation performance. For light, Things That Talk is actually a 25 minutes duration of work session that for one single spectator. So there's a single spectator going to a space. It's a space like science or laboratory, but without any performer. So in this case, so light becomes the non-anthropomorphic actors through their immaterial material or the material form, like table lamps or the projector on its own. So I take further this light as actor as a concept into this work. And again, musicality helps me to transform the light and the things and the space and the infinite relationship between. So this, as mentioned, the musical composition, the structure that informs a language or a structure of the light and also the space and the things of itself. And so that the spectators can freely to move around or invite the spectators to explore or to take action or non-action. So, and lastly, and in this work, science also has another role. So, well, light is always about technology, that's what we know. But at the same time, in this case, in this work, I include a sensor, but the ambiguity, but I include the ambiguous response of the sensor. That means that sometimes we take that as a failure. But I include that failure or ambiguous response of sensor into the composition so that the spectators will want to really not sure whether they're actually interacting with the sensor or no, or it's actually the autonomy of the light installation of itself. So through this instability and also indeterminacy, this opened up a space for spectator to rethink. So again, I invite the spectators through this strategy to interact with the light and also the space to invite them to think. So after these three works, so hopefully you can see that all these elements, so they're not just individual elements, but they are interconnected. They're forming a networking and entangled structure. And at the same time, there could be some interaction or interaction. So from Karen Bauer terms that these will inform the more potentiality and aesthetics of light in installation and performance. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Tamara Figueroa. Tamara is a Chilean performance designer who specializes in space and light and is the director of Deek 5 Studio, an organization that's dedicated to the production of scenic works and transdisciplinary projects. Tamara.
Can down the lights a little bit. Thank you. Yes, it's much better. Buenas tardes a todas, a todos, a todes. Good afternoon to all and they. Paradigms of lighting design from Southern. I am very grateful to be here on this panel as a South American designer. I salute all the people and institutions who made possible my participation in this beautiful meeting. I'm particularly grateful with Barbara Brihidova, the whole PQ team, and Scott Palmer for inviting me. And I greet with special affection to my country PQ delegation. In the next few minutes, I would like to share with you a sensitive view about some lighting exercise that I have selected mainly from my work, but also citing a piece which allows me to develop the idea of light and shadows as an articulator of aesthetic paradigms of my processes in lighting design, and share my creation artwork as a person who came from the southernmost country in the world. I quote the documentalist Patricio Guzman in his film work, The Light Nostalgic, and I began. On our wet planet, there is only one brown spot observable from space. Where is there no moisture? The vast Atacama Desert. Santiago de Chile sleeps at the foot of the Andes mountain, range at an altitude of 35 degrees and the encase of the coastal mountain range, from which Valparaiso and the deep Pacific Ocean emerge. Where I came from, the sun disappears on the sea. In Chile, there are many astronomy fans. I'm just one of them. In the Valley of Chile, beyond a hobby, the observation of the stars and their constellation represent for the many sensitive practice of a search for the origin, a guide to the position of the Earth in the universe, and why not, a spiritual search. The Southern Cross, it is a glassed constellation of the south, the closest star to the horizon of the southern point of the planet, who leads us in a straight line forward the ice fields and Antarctica. So, all the people of the south, we recognize this inverted cross as a guide to our cosmological tradition and our polytheistic philosophies. We have only the sun and the moon in common in our northern and the southern skies. And on behalf of them, I will share a selection of creation developed mainly in the open sky during 2020 and 2022. From the most arid desert in the world, the sky is completely transparent. For this reason, the astronomers of the world, our archaeologists of the cosmos, migrate there to search the origin of the world from science. Kira, which means portal or door in Kunza. It is one of the many living ancestral language in Latin America. It's one of the work of my dear fellow, Julio Escobar Mellado. And it is the result of a plastic research that seeks the folds of light through passive lighting structures, that is, structures that do not have their own light, but they modify the path of light. Julio works with light, dark light, with the sky and the night. The performance was an invitation to rebirth through the darkness. Its premiere was scheduled for a night of the new moon, where the public, on the darkest night of that month, walked through the desert to the call of a drum. The road was dark, but the sound guided us toward a structured floor mirrored. 66 meters that were located under the sky. The work invited us to be its protagonist. Under and above the light of the Atacama sky, we observed the sky looking at the ground where our dark reflection were also. For the author, the fold is a procedure that exposes a concept of shape and expands reflection for the spiritual. The procedure involves its viewers and makers, then witness on the path of our own reflection due to the effect of time. Generation, the fold experience. light and sight. In October 2019, month before the pandemic, the largest social revolt broke out Chile, which demanded a structural constitutional change, a process of police and street confrontation that brought many victims. In January 2020, with the country on strike and with a curfew due to the police repression of the revolt, Palomario, which is not a word that exists in Spanish, but rather the conjunction between the words paloma, that means pigeon, and palomario, that means palomarium, pointing to the skies as a span of sin. We rehearsed it in Galpón container shed, in the former train station in Valparaiso, a creation center occupied by local artists and communities. And we thought of the work so that it would be in the open sky, where its starting time was sunset and ending at the beginning of the night. We installed the work in a cemetery on a hill overlooking the sea. And the 7 to 20 by 210 meters arc was revolving a LED circuit was installed on each side, 5 in total. Those what accompanied the performances are disharmonic rhythms, framing geometrically the public's view on the landscape. Palomario sought to frame the sea and death as a conceptual allegory of death and life. From Valparaiso, we wanted to highlight the relationship between heaven and death and draw attention to thousands of dead who were thrown down into the sea during the Pinochet dictatorship, their bodies never having appeared again, as a way to vinculate calm poetical reflection and protest. Light and earth. Container Shade is located on an artificial floor over the sea. In it, Container Theater Collective Group and Theatrical Creation Lab have their work base. In January of 2025, during the second wave of pandemic, the team was selected to create a show that will represent Valparaiso in a national project. The lockdown did not allow us to work in a conventional way. We were not allowed to call a hearing, and we had to ask for police authorization to rehearse all together. The assignment of the director, Stephanie Duarte, was to get on the roof and focus our audience on the people who live in the buildings on a hill opposite, so that they could see the show from their homes. We were 1,015 meters between the play and the first spectator, and our stage was 80 meters wide, 30 meters deep, and located 50 meters high. As in Palomario, the sunset and the sea is the background where our leitmotifs. The challenge of lighting this performance and their actions was very great because, first, because of the proportion. Second, because of the height. And third, because of the distance. The sun, flares, and fire dramaturgy were our materials. Memory of Fire was the consignment, and the sentence written on the roof was the dramaturgy selected. Searching for redefinition for those places, and landscape that become stages in themselves, it's a conversation that as a theater and performance designer must lead. in the name of sun. In my processes, I have not been able to think about enlightenment without considering that indigenous culture, the indigenous culture in plural. Point out because it is part of Latin America identity and believing that heaven is a portal to the divine. It is something to transcend the false monotheism that the conquest brought with it. The sun in Latin America, as in other ancient cultures, represent the centralization of power and death. The colonization process in Latin America has been accelerated and fierce. Lighting from above has been the law of light from since the invention of electricity. Paradoxically, light has been associated with good and darkness, with evil, without considering that enormous crimes have been committed in the name of good light, using light as a symbol. My search has been to put the procedure of political art on an equivalence to those of lighting design in the field of performance. In this way, the conceptual reflection that has been defined in my procedure, in my look, is strengthened as a discourse and becomes a composition strategy that has impregnated my identity as a performance designer. Horizontalizing the light it is my procedure. Installing the lighting instruments laterally and obliquely, so that is in reflection shape that shadow permits as an authorial gesture. That has been the way in which I have managed to expose an ideology that comes from the contracultural as a personal way to demand justice. Greetings from the technical team. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Catherine Graham. Catherine is a lecturer, researcher, and lighting designer based at the University of York in the UK. She's a lighting designer for Theatre Re, and she's a collaborator, co-editor of the Contemporary Performance Lighting volume, and a key contributor with a very important chapter of her own. Ladies and gentlemen, Catherine Graham.
Thanks, Scott. It's a delight to be here. I'm going to try to be quite swift because I'm really keen to get chatting to all of my fellow panelists after 3 really exciting contributions. So, the image on screen is from a work of mine that I've recently redeveloped, which is a piece called Bluebell. I'm not going to talk much about this piece other than to use its opening moments as a way into sort of thinking about light. This is a play, a performance, that is interested in how and why we perform stories. And so in the making of it, the idea of the ghost light became a central device for us as a company. The idea of the ghost light, this kind of single source of light that's left on in theatres that would otherwise be dark. And so in the performance, or in the making of the performance, the ghost light became a central route in for us as both metaphor and material, allowing us to connect the material practices of performance with ideas of the supernatural. So this is a tiny, fairly on-the-nose example, which I'm using as a route into thinking with and through light, framing how it straddles both the material and the immaterial. The multiplicity of light is, for me, what makes it so interesting and so profound. Light both represents and is a juncture between the tangible and the intangible, the concrete and the ephemeral. And this brings me to the proposition that I want to make about light as a performance material, which is that light is a material of negotiation, transience, and instability. So light is, as many of us in the room will know, constantly in relationship with everything else, with every other element of performance, transforming and being transformed. Sitting in its in-between space, light modulates both dramaturgy and materiality. No matter how concrete or how solid a gesture of light, it remains always transient, fleeting, and subject to continual shift and change. As a fundamentally slippery material, light both generates and performs a kind of instability. It creates a space where things are unstable and dangerous and perhaps slippery. All of this speaks to me to a kind of multiplicity. For anyone else in the room who is in the exceedingly brilliant preceding panel on trans and non-binary scenographics, Nick Farr's call for an embrace away from the both and, or towards the both and rather than the either or. For me, light is a paradigmatic material that can do this because it is so slippery and so weird and so messy. So that's a sort of proposition of thinking with light or through light as a way of approaching theatre or performance. I'd like to, I suppose, think about an example of how this works in practice by turning to another piece of work, which is a piece of work called Whole, which is a play by Ellie Kendrick, directed by Rash Theatre Company and with lighting design by Catherine Williams. Scott has already mentioned Catherine Williams as one of the contributors to our book. They are a non-binary theatre artist, lighting designer, whose work is deeply influenced by their own feminist politics and their own commitments to social justice. In the book, writing else about other work that they have made with Rashdash, Catherine says, the collaboration we have together and the light art that those conversations become is what happens when lighting becomes a feminist character in each project. And I think that's a lot of what's at stake in this production. The play itself is messy and furious and quite feminist in how it, I suppose, tears through ideas of how we see or might be seen, or what it is. It's using this idea of kind of black holes and points of disappearance. And much as we've talked about elsewhere on the panel, in ways that light moves beyond a negotiation of visibility and towards a sense of affect and feeling. There's a really strong sense in this production that the light is a tangible presence. It holds the bodies. There's a kind of color here that saturates the air, so it feels thick. It feels as though we're never picking out one single body, or we're rarely picking out one single body, but rather the light is a kind of connective tissue that holds the piece and moves through a sense of affect and orientation, a sense of, I suppose, movement and feelingness with these bodies on stage. An exception to that happens at the beginning and the end of the performance, or the beginning and towards the end of the performance. So it begins by introducing the members of the six-person ensemble, first individually, in opening scenes that establish quite a hostile, antagonistic relationship between the women on stage and the light and sound around them. So first off, a woman appears in the kind of circular space at the back edge of the set and is pointed by the light, directed by the light through the space as it moves her through, and she never quite is able to finish what she's saying, because when she gets to the microphone that the light has led her to, it keeps cutting out the sound. Next up, another woman enters, moves into the light. It is bright and clear, and she starts to speak. She says, "I'm walking down the street at night, and it's dark, and there's a man." But the light moves away from her. She runs after it, placing her face into its beam, and starts over. I'm walking down the street and there's a man. Again, and slightly sooner than before, the light moves away and cuts her off. She persists, chasing after the light to restart what she is trying to say. Over and over she tries, and each time, in addition to moving away, the light also contracts so that the lit space becomes smaller and smaller and forces her to contort herself in increasingly uncomfortable ways. She ends up kind of on the floor in the last tiny patch of light remaining. So this sort of sequence of a kind of rogue or misbehaving spotlight borrows tropes from clowning, where similar devices are used to comedic effect, pointing, in those instances to the artificiality of the theatrical machine, or some laughable ineptitude on the part of the performer or lighting operator. But here there's something a little more sinister going on. The light is enacting a kind of power, structures and systems that the women are forced to negotiate. One by one, each of the actors are introduced in this way, being put through some task by light and or sound, and then lowered into a hole that's on stage or disappeared out into the darkness. The text here offers a direct challenge to the gaze, accompanying this sort of sequence, which is precipitated by a complete change in the quality of light. Where we began with the single searching spotlight picking individuals out against the darkness, now for most of the rest of the play, the whole space is held in this richly colored light. No one body is put forward here. The light is not working to direct the audience's attention towards a particular figure, no longer isolates the performers against the space. The space is held in light, and bodies move through the shifting rhythms, patterns, and colors in a complete refiguring of the kind of atmospheres that the performance began with. When a beam of white directed light does return to the space, it is to work with a mirrored piece of costume, reflecting the gaze backwards. Looking is an act, the script says. Things know when you're looking. Some things don't like to be looked at. And here in this moment, there's an interplay of light and costume that makes for a dazzling spectacle that is at once a beautiful costume, light, body, object, or assemblage, and also something that is physically difficult to look at. This performer is in the light, but she also is the light in this moment. For me, this kind of negotiation between a light that holds the space and a light that pulls the bodies out, again, comes back to this question of the multiplicity and the slipperiness of light. Here it has been deployed by Williams in an explicitly feminist way, holding with what the rest of that production is doing, because it is always already both. It is the same light that is the hostile, threatening force at the beginning that is also the liberating force that holds the performance at the middle and then as in the climax. So that sort of brings me back to, I suppose, the ways in which I'm proposing or asking that we think about light, which is to say that thinking with and through light is inherently about this, or can have this political sense, I suppose, or an ethical sense, because it is about grasping towards a shifting and uncertain target. It becomes an invitation to dwell in spaces of instability and compromise.
Thank you so much for those international perspectives on thinking light. Next, we'd like to just have a pause for a short time, and we're going to take the lights down in this space, and I'd like you to feel the light, and I'd like you to use this short interlude to think about what has been discussed so far, and perhaps think about what it's made you think about light in performance, and perhaps you might decide you might have a question for one of our 4 or all of our 4 panelists. So we'll just have a moment for you to pause and think. So I hope that reflective space is productive. And so we have around 30 minutes to throw this discussion over to you and to engage in hopefully a dialogue, a wider conversation that perhaps draws out. You might have some questions that you might want to have clarified, and perhaps to offer your own observations about what you've seen and heard and maybe felt this afternoon. Is anybody brave enough to start? Shall I run up? Is that, oh.
Hello. Hello. I'm Mary. I'm from Florida in the United States. And I really enjoyed what Tamara and Catherine, you shared about light. And I was thinking about how light can have feminine and feminist qualities and also spiritual qualities. And I feel like a lot of lighting has headed more in a more mechanical kind of sense and more of a harsh and masculine kind of practice. And I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts about that.
It's a very huge question because I think that we live in a masculine world, and masculinity not necessarily has to be men's or be woman's. No, so it's a way to how to express and how to wear relationships. So I'm a performance designer, and stage is mostly are a space of men's and technical things, or technical problems. And it's true that women, we have far for techniques problems, or scientific problems, or mathematical problems for a few years, few centuries now. So in my way, I don't have a problem. I don't have this problem. No, I'm not suffer to be a woman working with light. And I think that it's a very opportunity and a very untypical case, because I truly believe in my fellows, and I truly believe in how light and art experience can be different for other persons too. So I think that the most important to me, it was recognized that I'm dedicated to high cultural art. So the social fold, it's more important to me than the feminist soul, because I believe that class is the very most different between persons. Gender, it's a very fluid, no, because the men are sensitive too, and the women are rough too. So it's not the big question. I think that spiritual things are much more important in that case, because South culture are truly polytheist, no? So in our Occidental heritage, it's a very huge problem for us, because we travel for a very conquer process. So I think that how can be me an artist, how can express that? When light is my material, it's natural. It was natural, no. So I think that take position about that, it's more important than thinking about that or saying things about that. It's practice. How can you practice your ideological things about your artwork? So that is the most important to me. I believe that stage and performance designer are an artist. We are artists. So the message is the message, the process, and the gesture are the most important thing in any process. I don't know.
Well, thank you for this question and for your response, Tamara. I suppose one of the things that's really interesting to me is thinking about, I suppose, the substantive material of light, and that there's an invitation there to think through what it might do or what it might become. I'm sort of wary of creating another binary by thinking about a shift away or a shift towards, because, well, in a few ways, one, I think that to be feminist is not necessarily to be feminine. So there's, and I know that's not what you were saying in your question. So though there is we're kind of pushing against a history of thinking about lighting design in theatre, a lot of which has been very boring, or towards a kind of precision or control or sense of a definitive goal, right? A clarity. I put a light on this actor, then I see that actor, which speaks to a kind of straight line, an assumption that we're perceiving things in the same way, whereas things are much more slippery, much more messy than that. Of course, it's possible that I'm just simply a terrible lighting designer, so I think it's messy and difficult and impossible in a way that perhaps others have a neater relationship to it. But for me, it's following the quality of the material and following what it might do in time and space and with bodies and stuff that can open up new ways of thinking and sort of pushing between those kinds of sorts of fixity or, I suppose can do more than what that kind of historical approach or what the approach has historically been, if that answers.
So just would like to take on this to more material, the materiality and also the nature of light. So I'll go back to Karen Barra again. So that's feminist, physicist, and also philosopher. So when we think about light, the material of light is actually paradoxical. It's both wave and particle. So it's both tangible and intangible. So as Catherine's articles and also your presentation, is actually shifting and uncertainty. And I think that shifting and uncertainty, that nature in the light is already against the binary, against the dichotomy, and this is already a feminist thinking in this sense. So I think, I think it would be important to address the nature, the very essence, the material of light, to think about the aesthetics of light and how light can be related and not related, and how this multiple relativity, relationality can be expanded and also be explored to find the essence of light. So I think that's my thinking about the this feminism and light. So.
Yeah, thank you. Also, thank you for the question. When I think about this, actually one of the greatest inspirations I've had as a lighting designer is from Jean Rosenthal. And Jean Rosenthal was the first lighting designer to be credited as a lighting designer in the world and Broadway. And for me, she wrote a book called The Magic of Light. And she was the first to write a book about the poetry of light. So for me, that was kind of my first. Normally, books about lighting are very much about technical stuff and like, do this, do that. And but in her book, she worked with Martha Graham, and they developed contemporary dance in the 40s and 50s, maybe the 60s in the United States. And Rosenthal describes the light in the space for the dance. She works with dance as the ocean that the dancers need to swim in. And for me, it was just fantastic to have a poetic view on light that I'd never seen before. And she's actually also writing a lot about being a woman in a man's world and how to cope with that. But for me, poetry is the thing that I'm mostly inspired and interested in. And for me, however that happens, in a feministic or masculine or I don't know way, as long as light touches me in a poetic way, I'm just I feel it's a universal language, and that's just what I'm really inspired by. So thank you for your question.
Hiya, my name's Ailsa. For context, I am a puppeteer and I specialise in shadow puppetry. And I'm really interested in the idea of light and darkness as a performer. And I have a question, which is if you think we can make an audience feel empathy for a shadow or for light.
Short answer, yes, definitely. No, but I've really seen that happen, and also as an audience member experienced that, and especially also having empathy for a puppet I think is quite fantastic, and light. Also, as I saw your pictures of your frame, I was very inspired by. It's just a frame. But the possibilities of framing yourself, and the same we do with puppetry or shadow making, that we can, the performer becomes something else and can have a communication with the light source, with the information space, and I was just very inspired by that image and this idea of framing things, and that's often what I think I also do with shadows and what I experience in that.
I think people are dark and lighted in the same way, so feel empathy for darkness, it's very natural. I think that depends on invitation. So maybe with as artists can be compose the darkness and the light with feeling people, but we can direct their feelings too. So it's a thing about rhythm, sensitives, but it's quite okay. Darkness is quite okay.
So thank you very much for your question. So I think, well, from my own artistic practice, so it's actually light and darkness. Well, actually, shadows is also part of a very important co-performance in my work. well, I think same as Michael, so the answer is definitely yes. So there's definitely empathy, but how? So for me, my approach is to construct through the language for lights and shadows of its own, and through not so textual narrative things, through this musical composition and through this rhythmic structure. Actually, we can easily feel the life and also the liveness through this rhythmical structure. And this is my own approach, or my own take to how this becomes a transform light and shadows transform into a co-performer, as well as we have all this feeling, including empathy, through into this so-called immaterial light and shadows.
Yeah, I agree with my panelists, fellow panelists, and have nothing really intelligent to add, so I will kind of move on quite swiftly, but other than to say, yes, I think we really can expect an audience to feel empathy for light or for shadow, and that a lot of that is in the quality of the invitation of how a piece is made. But yeah, more of that work, please.
Hi, my name is Katie. You talked about inspiration for some specific pieces that you created. I was wondering if you can just elaborate on a designer and artist, what other things that you see or experience to keep your growth as an artist, things that maybe excite you or other artists that you're influenced by.
I think the moon and light, the sky, for example, with me it's very concrete. No, when I wake up, I see the sky, and when I was a child, I think that my first remember of light, where was I 3 years old, and I saw by the window the reflect of the sun when where my mom maybe was cleaning, and I remember that with a lot of love, because I think that light inspired life for me. So we work in live projects, we work in live art. So I think that the process of timing in light, it's a very clear to me. When suns come and when come down, for example, no, when moon it's upside or not. When I was afraid of darkness, or when I'm enlightened with my own lights, no, I think that the inspiration it's very different between you who are you and who I am.
So personally, so as share, so I think well, like Tamara said, so everyone has its own take. So my own personal artistic development is tied into or entangled with my own scientific and medical background. So I was talking to Michael before the talk. So actually, my work also is about light. So I'm a pathologist. So I look at the cells through microscope. So the light passes through the cells and forms image. Of course, it could be beautiful, but at the same time, I think for me, this science or medicine has a very, very tension or very entangled relationship that I constantly reflect on or critically examine on. And that's critical examination also reflects or extends into my own reflections on what is the aesthetics of light, what is light in performance, or what is light in installation. So all this entangled together, but I think what's most important, I think, is still what about myself, what I'm so interested in, and what it matters to me, because it's just my life and my everyday life. So it's all about light. So that's inform a very important part of my own artistic practice. So.
Yeah, I think, like Tamara, I think a lot about natural light and the kind of light that we move through, kind of through a day or through a year, as something that I pull from a lot. Yeah, and I suppose I also think quite a lot about movement. For me, as a designer, light is a lot about, much more about feeling than necessarily about what it looks like. So I think about, yeah, I guess I'm looking out for patterns of movement maybe and squirreling those away for future use. Maybe.
Yeah, so thank you for your question. It's really, for me, it's a really big question, but for me, it's an inspirational, changeable process. So, as others have talked about, the natural light, I think has been the starting point in my kind of work with light. But I soon discovered that dialogue was actually what I was more interested in. And this dialogue is something both happening between audience and artwork, but my own interaction with other artists creating the artwork, and the dialogues that we meet in where we push each other. Because I tend to go, maybe you have an idea in which direction I want to go normally, but working with different artists and having that dialogue, but also having it with the audience when we show the piece. Because for me, the piece of art does not really exist before it's shown for an audience. And seeing how the audience takes it in, how they reflect on it, if you're lucky, you can do this several times and have audiences coming and seeing your work. This can change the work, and you can understand it in different ways, but it can also give you inspiration for other things you would have liked to do, but didn't manage to do, or things that you want to do in the future. So for me, this dialogue has also to do with teaching and having a dialogue with students and other teachers, and actually also the material that you are teaching. It sounds strange maybe to have a dialogue with that, but I think you can have a dialogue with light and darkness.
Hi, my name's Parker. I'm from Vancouver, BC, and I'm coming at this from sort of a perspective of a costume designer. My question is kind of specifically for Michael, but it's also for everyone. I was wondering what the response by the other aspects of design are to using darkness in a show, just what the response is and how the collaboration process happens when the idea of darkness is employed in a mainly visual medium.
I'll say something. It very much depends on how darkness is, I would say, is utilized. Because, yeah, darkness for me it has many shades, okay, and many intensities, if we can say that. I worked especially with also with total darkness, and in this space it's very different because the darkness is the medium. So, as you might have noticed in what I was talking about, darkness is always somehow present or being manipulated through the use of light. But when I work with total darkness, it's very different. It's a totally different approach. And I used darkness in order to create a space of diversity. So it became a space for having a dialogue. So the darkness was just a tool to create that space where you could use less of your cognitive energy on looking at people and thinking about what you look like. So it became, for me, a more democratic space, maybe. And I was interested in creating a space where dialogue could exist more freely, but where you also have to listen in order to know when to speak, but also giving you time to reflect. So for me, darkness is really a reflection space, but you can also use it as a scary space if it becomes what would you say, an unfriendly space, as we see it in many horror shows, and I don't know, joyrides use this a lot. So it has a lot of potential in that way, and I think it's just darkness has had a profound. Yeah, it has been symbolizing something very bad for many years, and I think it's time to change that symbol into maybe a reflection space instead.
I think that it's important to understand that darkness is not a solid thing, no, and light isn't too. So darkness are a very huge, enormous world of light, and not always can be represented for just one type of darkness. Maybe for our work, you need to use 5 types of darkness. That depends. I think that the night, it's so natural, and observe the night. You can recognize how luminous, how much light is in the night. So that it's a conceptual thing. Darkness, it's almost doesn't exist at all. We can close your eyes and maybe darkness is inside of you. So what darkness is for your identity, for your culture, or what darkness represents, it's more important that like darkness look.
Yeah, I guess if you'll permit me, it sort of brings me back to this idea of light as negotiation, right? That so precisely as Michael and Tamara have said, darknesses are plural, light is plural. What it is to be in those spaces is always multiple, subject to change. I think in practice, and coming to your question about how we negotiate or how we, I suppose, collaborate with other members of the team, I think that is the shifting position of light for me. A costume can look radically different, the color and the texture of it, depending on how it's lit in a particular space. So it's sort of incumbent on a lighting designer to have an understanding of how things sit together, and how we place shapes in space, how we understand elements of kind of costume, set, audience experience. All of that for me is, I suppose, a practical, logistical negotiation to have with other artists, but is also a practice of negotiating where the light might shift what it is to attend to any other element in any other moment.
Hi, my name is Danny. Thank you all for your great presentations. My question is specifically a response to Amy's talk, but I welcome responses from anyone. I really appreciate and love the way that you're talking about your work as composition. And I think the slide that you shared with this drawing of how you're composing the music is incredibly provocative and made me think of different types of representation, especially like Xenakis and how he was composing. And it made me think about composition as an allographic art form and how it necessarily needs a musician to activate whatever the composer has done. And so I'm wondering, it's kind of a two-parter question for the group of, you've all beautifully spoken about the affect of light, and I'm wondering if any of you have any thoughts about how you represent or draw these affects in your design process. And then the second part is specifically for Amy, the piece for one audience member. I'm wondering if you ever got to observe anyone experiencing that piece or talk to them afterwards, and if they ever felt as if they were playing the piece in a new way, or if the piece was being transfigured by whoever was in the space.
Perhaps I go to the second part first, and so thank you very much for your questions and your interest in this work. So yeah, that's the work close to my heart. In fact, I just, well, because of the very brief time, so I can only excerpt the essence, but in fact this work, not only the 25 minutes duration, but in fact there's some entrance, there's some preparation for the spectator. And afterwards, they will come out of the space that I will be there every single section with the dramaturge. She's also with me here. So to really not to talk to, not to explain to, but perhaps there's some emotion, some feeling, some affect, some reflections, or even some anger that is being reflected through this 25 minutes duration. So we really got the chance to talk to every single spectator. So they are totally different. Some things that I control everything, some things that, they can control. They try to use that 25 minutes to find every single senses, but of course they fail. And well, because I hired so well with this ambiguous response, and some just sit there, and because the floor is filled with wooden chips, but the space on top is actually the science-like, laboratory-like space. So it's a contemplation or interrogation about science. So in that sense, some audience will just sit on the floor, experience the light and the space and the things, how they talk. So I think that's a really inspiring process for myself, because I really got to know how this light interacting with all these spectators. So that's about a little bit more details about that work. Thank you. Okay.
Very fast then. Okay. I just want to add that for me, light and music has a very intimate relationship, and we see it, of course, in concerts and everywhere. But personally, I'm actually much more inspired by music in my work than anything else, and especially actually working with contemporary music can be very challenging and very groundbreaking in ways of light and the music becoming an agency together, and maybe taking over spaces and forming new structures. And this has inspired me a lot in my work. When I work with Wagner, for instance, he in his scores, he actually writes down what the light should do. And so he had a very big vision, even though he was a composer, of when the light should change. And as a lighting designer, that's quite interesting when you're reading that score to say, okay, should I do this? Or should I go against this? Or is this actually a really good idea? Of what is actually what is the fundamentals of this? Why did he want this to happen? Yeah, but for me, it's really inspiring. Thank you for the question.
So we've run out of time, and we have Katrin Brack about to take the stage. So I'd just like to finish by thanking you as an audience. I felt from the stage you've been really engaged in the discussion here. Thank you for your questions. And to conclude the session, could I ask you to thank our 4 fabulous panelists?